Oh, it's my favourite time of the week. The great man Mark Latham is here, hot off the trail for the New South Wales election, the leader of One Nation and our dear friend. How are you, great man?
Great, thanks, Paul. Always good to be in the man cave.
So tomorrow is going to be the funeral of George Pell, and there are going to be protesters. Police originally said no. The protesters have now compromised by saying they won't go on the street immediately next to the cathedral. But what does it say about our country that we've now got to protesting funerals, regardless of who we're burying and what you're protesting?
Well, there used to be a decent standard. My old mum used to say, if you can't say something nice about someone who's passed away, say nothing. And there was respect to family and friends in a time of great pain and loss that you'd leave funerals alone. But to have a political protest, and this is, I heard on the news this evening, not just about allegations of pedophilia and what's happened in the Catholic Church, but it's about Pell's attitude to LGBT people and same-sex marriage. I mean, it is a political campaign at a funeral, which personally I find sickening. You know, I play politics probably harder than the average MP, but I have a rule that you don't say things about people when they've passed away, no matter your attitude. I'm going to the funeral tomorrow, in large part, not out of respect for the man who's passed away, but it's become much bigger than that individual, George Pell. It's now, I think, a statement about the importance of the rule of law in Australia. He died an innocent man. The High Court cleared him 7-0, and you can't get more comprehensive than that. And it's also a statement about the importance of religious tolerance. I mean, just look what's happened to Dominic Perrottet in the last 24 hours from the Clubs Association and also the ABC. George Pell basically was pursued by the ABC because he was a Catholic. And this sectarianism, this intolerance, this bigotry that's now in our public life, I'm not a Christian, but I find it completely appalling that people are attacked simply for their faith, something that's so integral to their existence.
But also, if the point they were trying to make on the ABC was why do we give public money to religious institutions like schools, Opus Dei, all the rest of it, right? Well, okay, where was the bit about the Islamic school? Where was the bit about other schools of faith? Instead, it wasn't there. It's just about Christianity. And again, I'm not a person of faith, but I have respect for people of faith. And the idea that we only pursue one faith because it's the one seemingly the media wants to run away from because they were forced to go to scripture classes at their private schools 20, 30 years ago is creepy. It's weird.
It is weird, and we give public money to these institutions. It's not a majority of their budget, but there's a contribution because they're wonderful contributors to our society. And the two schools targeted by Four Corners are among the top 30 schools in New South Wales. Where's the expose about the bottom 30 schools that are failing their students, keeping disadvantaged kids disadvantaged, holding the poor back?
Let's talk about the amount of spending that's going around in this campaign, because it feels like, classic election campaign, an announcement every day, point at this, point at that. Last time I checked, New South Wales is not in a huge surplus, which means there's not extra money apart from the money they've already spent.
Well, New South Wales is deep in deficit and has $182 billion of gross debt.
Wow.
And this should be a major election issue. How do we balance the books and stop future generations having to fund this debt? Your great-grandchildren, Paul, will be funding this, as will mine. And the problem is institutionalised, that out of the COVID period, all these politicians know how to do is spend and never to save money on behalf of the taxpayer. In the last two state budgets here in New South Wales, so this is Perrottet and Keane, there were 362 discretionary policy changes. These are changes the government itself has made in the policy and the expenditure structure of the budget over the last 2 years. 362. How many of those were cost savings? 3.
Wow.
3. The other 359 were spend,
extra.
just shovel the money out the door. So it just shows a culture of expenditure crazy that's now developed. The politicians, maybe the polling tells them people don't care about debt and deficit anymore, but our great-grandchildren do. And on behalf of One Nation, we're very strongly committed to not only holding them to account, but saying, look, there's a whole bunch of expenditure areas we've got to cut and make some attempt to bring the budget back into fiscal responsibility.
But also, the drumbeat of the lefties, Teals and everyone else is, climate change because we've got to think about the future, think about the kids in the future. Well, balancing the books is about the kids in the future. So one set of logic completely out the door for the other. What about Penny Wong? So she's in London, apparently going to meet with the government there. But along the way has turned around and talked about colonialism, yet again spitting in the eye of the English, inferring that I think her father or grandfather had come from essentially sort of being a servant in other parts of the world. But isn't the story that the multicultural experience in Australia now has been able to produce the foreign minister of the country?
Well, absolutely. I would have thought she's an advertisement for colonisation because she's come from 2 colonial countries, one in Asia and one here, and flown first class to the UK on a good coin as foreign minister to tell them, oh, it's all so bad, this is where it went wrong. Well, you know, a grandmother or someone had a job in one of those colonial mansions, but and she's a product of Australian social mobility upwards, Penny Wong, a success story. And, you know, I grew up in a public housing estate. Cleaning up spew and crap at the Green Valley Hotel toilets wasn't much fun. I mean, a lot of us started very humbly, but we don't whinge about it, Paul.
Yes.
We don't whinge about it. What we say is if you work hard and you study hard at school and you get some qualifications and you work hard again and you do the right thing, Australia is a land of opportunity and you can get ahead. So, you know, Penny Wong, advertise yourself instead of going overseas to attack people.
There's inspiration in being the one who breaks the trend, which brings us to the Alice Springs stuff, right? We all know how complicated it is, but we also know that generally how it works, 2 weeks of media attention, we all move on, and Alice Springs becomes like Australia's Chicago. Oh, has that happened again? Okay, cool. Do I live there? No. Move on. But what about the ABC? Desperate to find a narrative not to talk about what's been going on, turn around and report that the meeting of locals, including indigenous locals who say we want something better, was some sort of was infiltrated by white supremacy.
Well, I saw this report, and I trust you'll show it on the program here this evening. But it's a disgrace in terms of journalistic standards because there's hundreds of business people at this gathering, all worried about their shopfront being trashed, their livelihood being threatened, their safety at risk. And the one person who's interviewed in the report is some lefty radical who says, oh, they're all white supremacists. Where's the interview of business person after business person, hard workers, economic contributors who are petrified of what's happening on the streets of their own town? Now, the ABC has someone who's, you know, the indigenous reporter. Well, at least they should be objective about the facts, and this was an example of bias and fake news that shouldn't stand without challenge, and quite frankly, yet another very poor reflection on the national broadcaster.
Has Albo been able to get away with his poor performance in Alice Springs?
Well, Albo says it's a intergenerational problem. Well, hello, is that a discovery? We've known the nature of these problems for a long, long while. They are intergenerational because, unfortunately, at their core, why are the kids wandering the streets at night? Because they're not safe at home. The safety of children comes first. You know, your kids sleep safely at night, Paul. Mine do. We've got to fight as hard for these Indigenous kids as we would for our own.
Bloody oath.
And you and I know that anyone who threatened our kids, well, they wouldn't last very long. So where's the political iron and determination to say that these Indigenous kids have got to have a better existence? And if they're at school, studying of a day instead of sleeping, if they're sleeping at night safely, going to school the next day, they've got a chance in life. And Alice Springs, Western New South Wales, which I visited in our parliamentary recess, these are tragedies, unspoken tragedies that bring shame upon our nation. And for Albo just so that they're tough problems intergenerational, it's just not good enough.
I say it every week. This bloke's the General for Common Sense. Send some soldiers with him at the March election. Mark, nice to talk
Thank you,
to
Paul.
All the best. Mark Latham.